grow as a grower? Are you tired of being put to sleep by your educational growcasts? Are you tired of hearing about products you don't fucking want and can't afford? Hi, I'm Johnny Apple, and joining me is everyone's favorite amphibian, the Reverend Pirate Frog. Join us as we sift through the bullshit on the internet and try to get better as growers. This is your average grow.
Hey, dude.
Hey, man, what's up?
Oh, not much. There's been a lot of talk in our Discord and in comments about a bunch of people switching to organic or trying to have it out. And instead of listening to our two dumbasses talk, we figured we'd bring in an expert. Surprisingly, he said yes, which I'm assuming he did no research, thankfully. But I'd like to introduce Tad of KiS Organics. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, dude, what's going on? Glad you could make it.
Yeah,
Really
no, I
do
appreciate
appreciate
the happy to join the show.
Yeah,
So-
we have a lot of people that are switching, and so I'm sure of it. They got tired of us trying to explain to them, and they kept saying, "Yeah, no, that's great, but can you get someone who knows, how to talk to people and knows what they're doing?" And so, we're very big fans of your podcast and all of the work that you do, especially on Instagram. Some of those like air tube videos I know got a lot of play and a lot of people talking about it. So we reached out, and much like I said, to our surprise, you said yes. So we're very thankful. We're going to utilize you the best that Yag knows how. So prepare to be disappointed.
Well, I'm honored. I always I'm down to support other people putting out podcasts in this community. I think we need a lot of voices to spread the message and talk about what we're doing. So yeah, again, happy to do it.
Awesome. So I usually like to ask our guests, like, what's your relationship with cannabis? How did you get started in, what's your roots with the plant that we all have grown to love?
Yeah, mine's going to be totally different. Some people may not like it as much. I'll be honest. So I grew up. My dad's a big pothead. Hope he doesn't mind me saying this publicly, but kind of privately throughout his whole life. And then my brother has a really strong relationship with cannabis as well. But for me and my endocannabinoid system, when I smoke, I don't. I guess I don't enjoy it quite as much. It makes me. I get that couch lock effect with all genetics, and I eat everything in sight, and it just hasn't been super productive for me. That being said, I do like to partake occasionally, but I'm a lightweight. For an edible, 5 milligrams is plenty for me. So my real passion around it has always been on the cultivation side, because I love science, and I love the fact that when we talk about agricultural crops, we know everything about corn. We know everything about how to grow wheat. There's not a lot of science and research left to do there. But cannabis is still a new crop. They're still coming out with new research all the time. And I love that, as a private company, I can be a part of that research. It's so cool when I see that some of our papers have been, incorporated into books on cannabis, or my podcast has actually been included in curriculum in some of the universities that are putting out research like in Canada and stuff. So that's really my passion around it. It's definitely on the cultivation side. So yeah, but I guess going back to my story was, I really discovered cannabis when I was working with my father, and we had a compost tea business. And I got into IC Mag in the organic soil section because my family, we've always been big organic people. And I saw there was just so much misinformation around compost tea at the time in there. And so I started posting and commenting. And then that really got me interested in growing the plant. And so that's sort of my journey.
That's awesome. when you were in that compost tea, didn't you have a special bucket or something you use?
Yeah. So my
your tea?
father, he was one of the very first people to work with Dr. Elaine Ingham on establishing a lot of the testing and research around compost tea. He was a co-founder of the International Compost Tea Council, and he created one of the first 5-gallon compost tea brewers that was commercially available. So yeah, he was one of the first soil food web advisors. And so that was my sort of introduction to soil biology and the soil food web. And
it's a fantastic introduction
growing up.
It's also huge shoes to fill. But before we pass over it, our co-host Helling, who can't be here, is kicking himself for multiple reasons. But you being a lightweight might be his happiest moment in his life. He is the exact same way. He is all about cultivation. He practically never consumes. I mean, he smokes. I think a joint would last him a week if need be, and then that's no lie. And so it is. I think he's right now kicking himself, going, "Oh man, we could have talked about that too.
Could have bonded on that." Yeah.
You will get no hate from anyone here. You will be celebrated only by him and others, of course. But with those huge shoes to fill, and wanting to kind of grow a plant to basically get the right information out there too, to reinforce, I imagine, what you guys knew. How quickly after planting your first seed and getting into it did you fall in love with it? Was it the first time you're like, oh man, this is it?
Yeah, it took me a little while. I'll be honest, because I was always like a straight edge kid. I got good grades in school. Played sports. And so the idea of doing something that was sort of in the gray area at the time here in Washington State made me a little nervous. But I met really awesome people through the community, and I actually got all these super old genetics at the time from one of the guys in IC Meg who was local to me. He gave me all these cuts. And that was my first introduction was, I had SC99, ChemDog, the one from Coot, all these plants that people nowadays talk about kind of
dream
fondly.
about having.
Yeah, that probably should have held on to. And there were some cool crosses in there, we all look back. But so I never started with seed. In fact, I didn't even grow seed until significantly later. Everything was cuttings because of such an awesome community in Washington State where I was able to get
with a library like that. You don't really need to go planting seeds.
Yeah.
That's wild. So what was your first grow like? Because you kind of smiled like, I didn't love it at first.
Oh,
yeah. Struggle with it? Was it like the plant struggling, or was it just
so here's the thing. Yeah, totally. You guys of all people would understand this because if you started growing 20 years ago, gosh, I feel old. You remember there was no good information. The only place you could go for information was your local grow shop or some of these online forums. There was Sesame tips. Yeah. And I remember going into a grow shop, like I'd park around the block and like kind of like I just always felt like I was being monitored. It just never. It was gross in there, and there were no plants in there. Like no one was growing plants. Like I grew up on a plant nursery. You walk into a garden center, you see plants. They know how to grow plants and keep plants alive. But the grow stores, it's just like I feel like the advice was very mixed. There was definitely some passionate good growers at grow stores. I don't want to act like that didn't exist, but a lot of them were just kids with a second job or something.
Yep.
Yeah. And, they'd be pushing, General Hydro or Advanced Nutrients or whatever brand they probably made the most money on. So the nutrient side was challenging. But then it's like, how do you determine out of all these bottles that have, fake Amazon looking plants or chicks in bikinis, like it's nothing like when you walk into a regular nursery. And so it's like, okay, are these nutrients really special? And so then I went down a whole thing, and that's where I ended up online looking up stuff to say like, oh, the plants are using the same nutrients. This is all marketing bullshit. But that's just the fertility side. I think for me, the challenge was like learning about grow spaces and environmental controls and what cannabis really wants. Like when you're first starting out, trying to figure out how to like set up a tent or build a grow room is really challenging. Like I know I made the mistake. I tried to run 2,000 watt HPS lights in a 4x8 grow tent. You know, absolutely fried my plants. That didn't work.
I'm sweating right now just thinking of it.
Yeah, I was like, someone told me online I could do it, and I was running the 8-inch ducts through there with a super high fan, and I thought I'd be okay, but I absolutely fried my plants. One time I didn't check on my plants for a few days, and I didn't really know what a fungus gnat was, and I learned real quickly when they completely took over the room.
Lessons.
I feel like I've made all the mistakes over the years. And my first grow room, I was joking about this yesterday, was actually up a ladder in a warehouse shed that my dad had, on a metal shed on the property. So first of all, we built it all out, we insulated it, we drywalled it, and then it being up a ladder was the most inconvenient, horrible place to have a grow.
Having to lift water up a ladder sounds trying.
Yeah, you learn a lot though, and so that's the biggest thing, is you just got to start growing. Like you guys, we talked about it right before the show started, is you're going to kill some plants, but you're going to learn a ton. And that's kind of the best way to go.
Yeah, and I think that advice is especially great coming from you, because if people don't know, most often you're used to talking to like PhD doctors and really, really intelligent people in this space, and the information that we can gain from those people is just overwhelming. So to go from anyone just going from starting to get to where you are now is awesome. And I think especially with more information coming out, it's so much easier to kind of bridge that gap and be like, that's great. A lot of that was bro science, like a lot of the stuff I remember growing up trying to get away with, looking back now going, wow, that was really dumb. And that was, that's such a short period of time that the information has changed so much, but it is really cool to see the journey.
I know we talked about it when we got my dad back into growing, and he's like, I don't understand. This is so frustrating. All I used to have to fucking do is throw Miracle Grow on it. That's all we had to do. This is so frustrating. Why we have to worry about it? It's like, do you really want to smoke Miracle Grow, guy?
Yeah, so, I think we've learned a ton over the last 20, 30 years about how to grow this plant. And we're still learning, which is awesome. And that was why I started the podcast, was to help bridge this gap between sort of like these experts in academia and people who really know how their specific area of expertise, and all of us growers that are constantly trying to learn and get access to these people. Like, I didn't know what VPD was for a long time, or PPFD or PAR, and all these terms that we just throw around now so casually. I didn't know what mycorrhizal fungus was. And so, yeah, there's definitely a learning curve for people. And I think that's perfectly normal.
Yeah, and it should be. If it's a hobby, you should strive to. I think most people have fun in the initial parts, the initial planning part of hobbies a lot, because they get really into the knowledge and learning, and then they get everything. And it's great when your hobby can be like, oh, I can learn more and more and more, and get to the level that some of these, I always tell Howling, it's like nerding out. Some of these, these PhD students know so much about this subject that it is almost like every other person that just nerds out about a single subject. It's really cool to see.
Yeah. So the goal with KiS Organics, with our company, is to simplify the growing process on the organic side. Less inputs, but take a science-based approach to it. So where we're using data to dictate what decisions we're making in our grow. And after doing this for a long time and working with a lot of commercial growers, I feel like we have a process that's very easy for growers to grow organically without a lot of the challenges on the fertility and soil side. You still have to have all your environmentals figured out. But that was sort of our goal with our company.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue, because a lot of people come off of the first time growing with some kind of schedule, right? The trio or A, B, part C, do this, the 30,000 bottles. But I was curious, I know with KiS Organics that you do have not so much like that same exact schedule or something, but is there some recommendations that you can throw out to someone who's going to switch on what kind of scheduling you could look at maybe with some of your products? Like,
Sure. Yeah. So first and foremost, start with good soil. It doesn't have to be our company's soil. We work really hard to use the best ingredients and to balance that soil for you based off of soil testing, so that you're starting with all the nutrients that your plant needs and at luxury levels, so that you're not going to run out if you use a large enough container. So the idea is, how much fertility can we cram into a container so that your plant, you can literally just water your plant throughout the grow without having to add all of these, ferments and microbes and nutrients and all these things on these schedules. Because one other thing to consider is everyone's room is different. So if your CO2 levels are different than mine, or your light levels are different than mine, or your genetics are different than mine, your plant's going to uptake nutrients differently. So there is no perfect nutrient schedule for everyone's setup. And recognizing that, what we try to do is put what we can into the soil and let the plant take it up, which means you have to go with either a larger container or a raised bed. If you want to go the whole cycle with just water. And we do have research, it's on our website, that shows that when you plant multiple plants in the same bed, you get better yield, more biomass than you do with those same plants in separate pots. So we actually did like a trial where we ran 30-gallon pots, and each plant in flower got its own 30-gallon pot, which I know sounds big for a home grower, but this was in a commercial facility. And then we ran those same plants, genetics right next to it, in a 4x4 bed. And we did all the statistical analysis on it, got all the data, and the plants in the bed significantly out yielded the plants in the pots. And I think there's some science that would show that, communal relationships between root systems and access to more volume of soil and fertility would support those results. So I guess the first thing I would say is start with good soil, start with good water. And, a water test is not expensive. It's like $30, I think, to get an irrigation suitability analysis. You don't need to be running to the store to buy bottles of spring water or bottles of RO, but you do need to have clean water, or at least know where your water is, to make sure that you're going to be able to reuse your soil cycle after cycle, so you're not building up in anything.
What is it you think is the biggest concern with the water? I really wanted to touch on that in your opinion.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of talk, specifically in the community with organics, about pHing the water and it being better. It's like, I think that's a misstep. And it's like, it's a confusion between the crossover with salts and organics. I'm just curious what your concern with water specifically is, other than pH, I guess.
Sure. So water is important. And the reason this conversation of like pH doesn't matter, and let's stick with water. We'll not talk about pH with soil yet, but let's talk about just pH with water. So the reason people say that and get away with it in organics is because a lot of time the alkalinity, and I'll try to keep this as basic as possible, but the alkalinity of the water is how much acid or how much base do we have to add to that water to change its pH. So RO water, very low alkalinity. There's nothing in it. It has very little TDS. There's no ppms in that water. It's relatively pure H2O. But as we add more minerals to that water, calcium, sodium, chlorides, bicarbonates, that can change the pH of the water and make it harder to adjust that pH. And if we water over and over again with water that's very high alkalinity, it can cause problems over time by bringing in a lot of, let's just say, sodium, for example. Plants don't need sodium. It's going to raise the osmotic pressure in the root system by having a lot of sodium in there. It's bad for your plants. So the less sodium, 0 sodium would be ideal, but the less sodium is better. Chlorides, same sort of thing. Plants need very little amount of chlorides, but our water can sometimes be high in that, and that can cause issue. So just knowing where your water is starting from and then getting an analysis. Because if you think about it, let's say you drink a lot of water. Let's say you drink a gallon of water a day. That's a lot of water, right? But compared to what your plant takes in over the whole entire cycle, if that water is high in heavy metals or calcium or sodium, it's going to build up in the soil, and that plant's going to take it up over time. So, in a grow room, you might go through hundreds of gallons of water in one cycle. So it does make a difference. I think that's the biggest thing. And then talking about pH in general. So if your water is low alkalinity, you probably don't need to pH it. And that's why most people get away with saying we don't need to pH in organics. Same with soil too. Again, the organic soil has more buffering capacity. Plants can grow in a pretty wide range of pHs, especially cannabis. But the way I look at it is, if we want to optimize plant growth, if we want to create the best environment for our plants, which is why we spend all this money on environmental controls and good genetics and all this, because we want to get the best yields and the healthiest plants, then putting our soil at an optimal pH range will allow the plant to put more energy into other metabolic functions. So rather than trying to get uptake nutrients, it can put that energy into other things like, growing more leaves or growing more bud, because it's able to access those nutrients more efficiently, I guess I would say. So there's plenty of research around pH. If you talk to any horticulturalist, any agriculturalist, any agronomist, they will tell you that pH absolutely matters. So there's no reason in organics we can suddenly just throw horticultural science out the window. The difference is just people get away with doing that a lot, because most people, you make your homemade soil recipe, you're probably in a pH range that's okay. It might be able to be improved, but in general, you're not going to see huge pH issues in organics like you would with hydroponics. Hydroponics, you get up to 7.5 and your plants are going to look like crap, or you get down to 5.5, same sort of thing. So, we want to optimize things, and that's why I like to at least understand and consider pH in my cultivation process.
So you don't think if you had a high pH like an 8 or a 9, you don't think it would be necessary with organics to like add an acid to bring that water down to a lower pH when you add it?
That's where your water test comes in handy, because if that pH is just a little bit of calcium, it's probably fine. But if what's raising that pH is a lot of calcium, then I would say, okay, well, maybe we should adjust that. Maybe we're getting bicarbonates in there. If we add an acid, we can help adjust this into a range that's going to be easier for the plant to take up those nutrients. So the answer is it depends, and that's where understanding your water is important. Yeah, that's why there's water experts, companies like Dram out there that focus just on horticultural watering and water systems, because it's very complicated, and it's not as just simple as saying pH 8.5 bad. You have to know a little bit more about what's in that water.
Right. So you mentioned starting with the right pot size and being able to water only. What is your recommendation for smallest pot size to be able to do water only run in an indoor tent type environment?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I don't have a great answer. 7 to 10 gallons is probably a good starting point. Now, that being said, I'm working right now with a grower a breeder, and we're looking at how we can create a soil that would allow for maybe one top dress of a bloom formulation. We'll say week 3 of flower, and a 7-gallon or 5-gallon pot, and still get through the full cycle. So that's kind of where we're at on that. But in general, depending on how hard you're pushing your plant, a 7 or 10 gallon, you might be able to make it through the cycle. But at the end of that cycle, you're not going to have a lot of soil left over. And so you'd probably have to rebuy soil, which adds additional cost. Whereas if you were in a bed, you're going to have a larger volume of soil initially and higher upfront cost. But then you can literally get a soil test or re-amend that bed right in place, and you're not moving soil in and out of your grow. And you can reuse that soil over and over again. And we have guys that have been reusing their soil for 5 years. The photos on my IG, that's third cycle here in my grow room, which is relatively new, but yeah, it's rocking, and it's just water because we're in a larger bed and all of that. So I would encourage people to consider growing in a bed if they have a tent. Just, if a tent's a 4x4 tent, maybe run a 3x3 bed. So you can still access the plant from all sides for pruning and airflow, but getting more soil in there absolutely makes a big difference. A lot of those little, you might look at a plant and say, oh, it has a manganese deficiency or some sort of issue. Those go away when you go to like a larger volume of soil because it makes watering a lot easier too. There's just a ton of benefits.
It is very funny. We, my co-host here, Johnny, has, I think it's 3 beds that you take care of, 3 fairly large beds.
4 technically, because 2 are at my dad's.
Yeah, and I grow in earth boxes, so we're like the embodiment of that illustration because Johnny can keep going. Where after I grow autos primarily, after 3 or 4 runs, you're going, well, I got to not dump or necessarily, but you really constantly have to stay on top of it. And I don't even do water only. Like I'm top dressing through stretch and then in flower. Whereas Johnny can go, how long could he go water only? It would amaze us.
Yeah, I've gone probably 2 runs now, and I haven't done anything in one of my beds anyways. Just because you can tell. I think, I had a huge top dressing on it. And then I used a lot of my own worm castings and worms. So I threw those all in there, and it's 100 gallons. Well, there's 70 gallons anyways to start. And it's been huge top dressing. So it's just like, well, it's in there. I'm just going to water only. Just literally, it's 2 runs now, huge runs in that one tent.
Wow, that's amazing.
But your personal beds that you do show on IG, though, are very impressive. And it does bring up 2 quick questions from our host, Howling, that couldn't be here, though, if you don't mind. The first one is the air tubes that you had in your grow room that you were running under the bed. Have you seen, can you talk about any benefit you've seen, or in general talk about the kind of the benefit, I guess, the thought?
Sure. So the idea behind them is under canopy airflow. So the concept is to take the air that is closer to the ground, which is going to be higher in CO2, and then push it up towards the stomata of the plant to allow for better and more even airflow across or underneath the entire canopy. Because when you have a fan, for example, just blowing on your plants, where that fan first hits your canopy, the airflow is probably too high. The plant can't evapotranspire fast enough. It's going to need a lot more water just to try and stay healthy. And you're probably going to see some leaf tip burn. This is due to the plant's inability to move calcium fast enough through the xylem because it moves in the same mode as water to keep the calcium in the leaf. So that's sort of what you see visually when you have a fan just blowing on your canopy. And then on the other side of that, you probably don't have enough airflow because your canopy is slowing that air. It's hitting the canopy and then not making it all the way through. So this allows me to get more even airflow underneath across the whole canopy, where you just get light movement with the leaves, and that's really all you need. So that's the concept behind it. Now, would I say that it's, I've done any sort of like data analysis on it and that's definitely better? No, but there is a lot of research out there on under canopy airflow. And from my conversations with Dr. Nadia Saba, who's also known as Dr. Greenhouse, I just did another podcast with her. We talked about under canopy airflow and why she likes it in grow rooms and some of that. So that's the concept. It's not something you have to do, but I do think everyone should think about airflow in their grow room. And think about what it's doing. So like my grow room is not optimal because my ceiling height in my garage is actually too high. So I have stagnant air 12 feet up where humidity wants to concentrate because I want to run a higher humidity because of my high heat. So I'm staying within that VPD range. And so I get water droplets on the ceiling that will turn to mold. And ideally, I would have another fan blowing air up there to keep air circulating up top, but I'm out of electricity. So there's always sacrifices you're making in a grow room. So I'm constantly monitoring my ceilings and aware of the fact that like I can't get as much airflow as I want way above the plants, because the plants are about, I'd say they're like 6 feet tall right now with the height of the beds and the height of the plants. They got a little too tall. But otherwise, what I have is one fan on one side of the beds and another fan on the other side, kind of creating the circular airflow around the plants. And then my under canopy airflow, which is a tube that has holes, a perforated tube that allows air to be pushed up towards the stomata. And what I'm using is called greenhouse convection tubing for that. That's not what its original use was for. The original use is to push long tubes, like air evenly across an entire greenhouse, like on a ceiling. So I've kind of repurposed it, but it seems to be working.
It also, at the very least, looks cool. I think it looks rad. And I think that, I know it looks so cool that Howling asked me specifically about it. And then the second question was about your bottomless transplants.
Bottomless pots, yes.
Bottomless pot transplant grow. Would you do it again? That was a specific question.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
That's a great question. So all credit goes to Steve Cantwell, Green Life Productions. I consider him a good friend, associate in the industry, and he's a really smart dude. Also a kick-ass former MMA fighter, if you ever want to look him up. So he owns Green Life Productions, and he came up with this idea of taking a fabric pot about 1 or 2 gallon size, if you're picturing this, because it's a podcast, without a bottom on it. So it's literally just a tube. And then he puts that tube, this fabric tube, on a tray and then fills that with soil and then plants into it. And so when he goes to transplant that, after the roots have filled it out onto the tray, he can just pick up the whole pot and put it right on the soil. And then he doesn't have to, dig a hole to transplant and go through all that. And so in theory, this reduces transplant shock, and it absolutely saves a ton of time when you're planting, 200 plants. You can do that in minutes versus the amount of time it would take to dig the holes and plant them into the soil. Now, this is a very small grow that I did. I only have, it's 2 beds going here. So I wouldn't say anything I'm doing is conclusive. But what I'm seeing, so initially what I saw was the plants that were in the bottomless pot were, and I have 6 in each bed, just so people can picture it, did better initially than the ones I transplanted. And I think that was for 2 reasons. One, because when I first transplanted, I tend to be an aggressive transplanter. I tend to really disturb the roots, but then I also at the same time underwatered slightly. And so I started to see some issues with I started to see a little bit of discoloration in the leaves. And I was like, what's going on? And then I realized, because with beds, it's not as easy to necessarily tell. And I've been growing for a long time. I've been watering for a long time. So it's hard for me to admit this, but I did underwater. And so when I adjusted my metrics on my watering this cycle and started watering heavier, the plants recovered. And whereas the ones that were in the bottomless pots did not display as much of a deficiency issue, primarily because I hadn't just, torn up their roots and disturbed their root system right before underwatering. So I created 2 pretty major stress events. So all that being said, they're pretty even right now. The direct transplant plants are also dealing with another issue. So I have isopods, little roly-polies, and I've never had this before, but for some reason this cycle, their populations exploded. And so the ones that were in the fabric pots definitely have less damage on their stalk from the isopods, because when they run out of food, they start eating the plant and they'll start crawling up your stem, and they can be really troublesome.
Like cows on freaking grass, man. They go crazy. I've seen it.
Yeah. So, and there aren't a lot of good controls for isopods. I have heard I could try Sluggo Plus. I haven't tried that yet, but apparently that could be a potential solution.
I didn't even
People are
think
trying
about
it.
that. If you had when it gets so bad, you have to hand pick them off.
Isn't that like a spinosad in like pellet form or something?
It's iron phosphate and spinosad. Yeah, I believe is what's in that. I haven't tried it yet, but I have an entomologist friend who did recommend that as something I could experiment with, because they're actually I think they're in the mollusk family, so they're a very different type of insect that we have to deal with versus what we're used to dealing with. So a lot of our traditional approaches like won't affect them. So other people will talk about putting duct tape around the stalk of the plant, facing out to try and catch them from walking up, but it's really hard to get the duct tape on there. People put duct tape face down on the soil as a way of getting them to get stuck to it too, or creating like fruit traps or beer traps. But in my case, the plants are now large enough that I don't really worry about them. I feel like they're under control. They're not causing any economic damage to my plants, even if there's a little bit of cosmetic damage. So again, the ones in the bottomless pots don't have as much damage as the ones that are direct transplant, because I think it's harder for the isopods to walk up the pot. I don't think they can make it up there. So the ones that are in there, but it's not as much of an issue. So where will the yields land? I feel like they're either going to be even, or the direct transplants maybe slightly higher right now, just visually. I'm just guessing, but it's going to be pretty close. So would I do it again, or would I recommend it? I guess my answer would be, based off the data I have right now, would be yes. If you have tall ceilings and you can lift your lights up and space is not an issue, then it's absolutely something you could consider doing.
Oh yeah.
If you're in a tent or something, I probably wouldn't, just because you're going to run out of height.
You need every precious inch at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking like in my beds, that would be awfully tall at that point. And even in a 1 gallon, it'd be like, yeah, I'm pushing it. So yeah, I wouldn't want to transplant inside of a tent. Yeah, somebody like Grateful, he's got a huge room he could work that into, I'm sure.
Yeah, that would be great. I imagine, so I want to talk about KiS Organics, because I'm a little biased because shipping is so cheap when you're on the same coast. Thank you. Almost everything that a lot of people recommend is on the East Coast, and the shipping just really does kill me out here in California. But I imagine one of the challenges is having to educate people on your products. But I know that you offer a lot of different soils. There are a couple of them I wanted to go over. I know you have it's like a water only blend of some kind, right? And then you have a biochar too. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the differences between your water only or biochar recipes, and which one you think is better, I guess.
Yeah. So biochar is awesome. Let's just start with that. We've been using it now for over a decade. Couple quick notes. So not all biochar is created equal. So you do need to buy a high quality biochar. The company we work with is called Black Isle Biochar. They also do business as Black Biochar Supreme. And biochar is different than charcoal. So in order to create biochar, you have to take high quality, a very pristine wood, and then you have to pyrolyze it, which means heat it to very, very high heat temperatures, but at very, very low oxygen conditions. And this creates these very special properties in this biochar that will help with sequestering carbon and nutrients and creating habitat for microbes. And so it's a really sustainable, awesome thing. And when I first got into it, I did not think that biochar would make a difference in our soils. I was like, we had our water only soil. It had all this nutrients in it, and biology, and good compost, and earthworm castings. And it wasn't until I saw this photo from one of the commercial facilities at the time we were working with, and this was way back in the medical days, and they ran a side by side, and they sent me the picture. And let me see if I can share it here, since we are this is a video podcast for some people. So this photo, if you can see it here, really was what did it for me. And so basically what we saw was about 8% better growth and yield by utilizing biochar in our mix. So
Holy shit.
yeah, absolutely a fan of biochar. And we're in this photo, we're using it at a rate of 8% total volume. Now, in general, we recommend anywhere from like 3 to 8% is a good range. And it's a one-time addition. You're not adding it all the time. And it'll last. So you can use it. That's if you're reusing your soil, it's a good investment to make in your soil. So every time I formulate soils now, I include at least 5% biochar in the mix.
How do you re-amend with biochar if you've got like a no-till situation? How do you reincorporate it?
Yeah, so you would you want to mix it into the soil because biochar does require a little bit of nutrients. It's more efficient at accessing specifically nitrogen than because of the high carbon amount in there than your plants are. So you will want to make sure that you're either
It's in the
charging
initial mix.
the biochar or mixing it in. And I don't have a problem with I don't have a problem with disturbing soil, and we can talk about that too. But I wanted to show you guys really quickly here because we talked about it. Here's the photo I took last night, right when the lights went off, of the plants in the trial. And the ones closest to us are the ones under the bottomless pot, and the ones further away are the ones not. So the ones further away are about, they're starting 8 inches lower.
Right.
So
and they're almost identical.
We got about
right?
Yeah, we got another 30 days to go. But you can see the light is a little bit lower on the next one because I'm adjusting I have a light meter, so I want to make sure the light levels are approximately equal for both plants. So yeah, that's what it looks like right now. And I got, like I said, about a month to go, and they should be ready to go.
That looks amazing, by the way. And thank you for sharing. I really do appreciate that. I do think that it's important to put an emphasis on getting quality ingredients. How much work how much work do you have to do when you're deciding to put together a blend or add a new product in testing it and trying to find the best source and all that?
It's a ton of work. I'll be honest, especially today because we work with a lot of commercial facilities that are regulated for heavy metals. And I think that's a big thing in this industry now that we don't talk about. Like back in the day when it was all black market, the big, like elephant in the room was people using Avid and paclobutrazol and Eagle 20, all these horrible, horrible chemicals that end up in the final bud that is not healthy for the consumers. And so now I think that issue is heavy metals. And so we've done a ton of research around heavy metals. We publish heavy metal numbers on our website for almost all of our products to the best of our ability, but it is expensive to test these things. But when I formulate a soil, it takes me a couple years or a new product. So we just came out with a bloom booster last year, and that took us 2 years to try and hit the levels, the nutrient ratios that we want with the cleanest ingredients possible, and make sure our heavy metals were super low so that we could use it in these regulated markets. And also for medical patients, heavy metals are not good for you. So that's sort of the process. So it does take a very long time to formulate it. It's not as simple as just throwing a bunch of inputs onto a tarp. And I do want to touch on that actually, because I see all these online recipes, and like Coots Mix would be a great example of this. And a lot of people have used Coots Mix and had great results. Equally, there's a lot of people that say Coots Mix doesn't work. And to that, Coots says, well, it's because you don't have my
worm castings,
right?
Yeah.
And he spends a lot of time making these castings. What he's essentially saying, and I would say this in a different way, is all soil recipes should be formulated around your compost, because everyone's compost has different levels of fertility. So Coots mix works for some people, I think, because their compost maybe has the right balance of fertility to match up roughly with the amount of, neem, crab, kelp that you're adding or whatever, which is not the lowest heavy metal inputs. There's those inputs now that we know more about are actually pretty high in heavy metals relative to other options. But that's so for us to formulate a soil, I always start with finding the best compost that I can. And then I create a base mix where I don't have all the, organic fertilizers in there. I get the soil test on that. And then I start adding fertilizer and tweaking it until I hit the levels of my targets for a specific crop, in this case, cannabis. And then once we've got the soil where we want to on a soil test, then we start doing trials. One thing to touch on, though, when we talk about soil fertility that I think is an underrated thing for new growers and people in general is understanding watering. So one thing that my botany professor taught me, and I like to share with people, is that underwatering and overwatering create the same visual symptoms in a plant. And this is really hard to wrap your brain around, because you see photos online and people see the droopy leaves and they're like, oh, you're overwatering your plant. You can't know that just from a photo. And watering creates deficiencies. So sometimes you may have the best soil in the world, but if you're either overwatering it too much or underwatering it, the plant's not able to access those nutrients. And that's why you may be seeing issues in your above ground plant that may not have been created by your soil, but by your watering. Or if your soil has the bad physical properties, so maybe it doesn't retain water well, or it retains water too well. All of those things can affect the healthier plant. And really what it comes down to, if you want to understand sort of the mechanism behind this, is it all comes down to root hairs. So root hairs are where all the magic happens in terms of nutrient uptake and all of that, and exudate release. And all the things that we want to have happen in our soil in relation to its relationship with the plant. And so when you underwater, it causes drought stress because you're killing root hairs. Now, these root hairs will regrow and regenerate, but in the meantime, your plant isn't able to get the nutrients that it needs. And so you'll see visual symptoms on the leaves that look like deficiencies. If you overwater, now you're drowning or killing root hairs, and you'll see the same visual symptoms up above. So understanding why these things occur is kind of fun, but basically my main point is, if you're struggling, or if you think you have a fertility issue, the first thing I always do with people is go back and look at how they're watering and make sure that you're watering correctly.
Awesome. Would you say that watering is the number one issue you see people make with living soil?
Yeah.
And if not, what? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a fair thing to say. I mean, there's a lot of places you can go wrong. The other one, the biggest thing I think, is this idea of less is more, I think is really important. It's much easier to add than it is to subtract. So I always aim for people, I tell them to be conservative, and then have a bottle of fish hydrolysate on hand. That's my go-to.
You just made Johnny a very happy man. That is his number. Yeah. He screams that from the mountaintops.
Good. I love that. Thanks, Johnny, because it's important. So if you start to see a visual deficiency, you can just start adding a little bit in with your water. You can get through the cycle, and then you can, maybe do a soil test or adjust your amendment rates. But if you over apply nutrients, you can end up, especially with nitrogen, you're gonna lower your yields. You're gonna cause a bunch of health issues, potentially have more pest pressure. So we want to make sure that we're getting these nutrients into the right ranges for the plants, or shooting low and then adding them during the cycle.
Love it.
That's perfect.
Absolutely love it.
Now, before we take too much more of your time, I have a couple personal questions I'm going to ask selfishly. As someone who primarily runs auto flowers in earth boxes, which soil would you recommend to start with?
I think you really can't go wrong in terms of our soils with the water only or the biochar soil. Or if you're a commercial grower, we make something called our commercial growers mix.
Okay. Well, I like
It has
the option of both. That's great. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I don't think, for the average grower, they're gonna, we have some people that just run our water only because it's cheaper. The biochar is expensive. So, and they're usually happy with their results. And sometimes, eventually they'll bump up, but they can also just add the biochar. So the only difference in the mix for us between the water only and the biochar soil is that addition of biochar. Okay. So there's no other recipe differences between the two.
Right on. You're just giving someone the option. You're either going to add this later or we'll do it for you.
Yeah. And mixing soil is not pleasant.
Fun.
Somebody's done a lot of it. So
yeah, I can imagine.
You mentioned that and how you are not against disturbing the soil. You want to touch on that a little bit?
Oh yeah, let's talk about that. That's a great one. So we have this idea of what people call no-till, right? That soil biology is very important. And when we till, conventionally in agricultural systems, it's really bad. Tillage disturbs, it breaks up the soil biology and kills it and damages it. It also creates a lot of erosion. So because that soil no longer has good biology, it blows away. And so we're losing topsoil. That's what the Great Dust Bowl, for example, historically was caused by poor soil management.
Depleted soil.
Indoors, because most growers are indoors or in raised beds. We're not doing mechanical tillage. No one's grabbing a tiller and bringing it into their room and firing that thing up. And so what we're doing really when we talk about soil disturbance indoors is, digging or using our hands to disturb the soil. So I'd like to highlight that difference. First of all, it's not as disruptive to soil biology as, a regular conventional tillage system would be. In addition to that, it's, the soil biology is very resilient. And so, and we're not getting erosion. That's the biggest thing. So indoors, the soil's not going anywhere if we disturb it. So I think that's huge. When we disturb soil biology is very resilient. And you got to think these, bacteria and archaea, for example, their life cycles are, 8 to 12 hours. They grow quite quickly. They could reproduce in minutes in some cases. So, in the course of your growth cycle, you have the coevolution with your plant of these microbes that have gone through many generations by the time you harvest your plant. And it's kind of hard to wrap your brain around that, I think. And when we disturb the soil, what we're doing is we're sort of resetting the biology to a certain extent. And there's research out there, and this is where it gets a little bit technical. But if you Google the term ecological disturbance hypothesis, basically what the ecologists, functional ecologists have looked at is when we talk about ecological systems, which is what our soil is, right? It's got all these different microbes working together, eating each other, preying, predating to create this ecosystem. When we look at ecological systems, you have systems that are very new. Let's talk about let's say a brand new grassland, for example. It doesn't have the same, or a prairie, it's not going to have the same level of biology as, say, an old growth forest, right? That's a very mature or climax ecosystem is what it's called. And what they find is the most diversity and the most biology exists in these sort of in-between ecosystems where we have, some disturbance, not a crazy amount of disturbance, but also not no disturbance. And so what we currently do, so that right there, to me, lends to the idea that it's, maybe a little bit of disturbance in our soil is okay. It's going to potentially increase diversity. And so from a biological perspective, which is the main reason people don't want to do it, I don't see that as a downside. And I don't see anything when we look under a microscope that would show me that, we're damaging the soil in any way. So I don't have a problem with it biologically. And there's research that shows that agricultural soils in general are some of the most biologically active and diverse soils anyway. So there's that. And then we want to talk about like the physical properties of the soil. So when we disturb the soil, what we're doing is we're essentially incorporating a whole bunch more oxygen. We're raising the bulk density of the soil, fluffing it up, say, and then allowing that soil to sort of reestablish throughout the growth cycle. And again, I don't see any downsides to that, because sometimes your soil over time, you're watering it, your perlite or pumice is rising to the surface. The soil is compressing. And people say, oh, that's organic matter, it's getting eaten by the microbes. Kind of, but what's really happening is sort of everything's kind of compressing as the bulk density of your soil is increasing. And over time, that can be a problem. It can become too compact, where you don't have the same pore space that you had before, and it makes it harder for the roots. So another case for soil disturbance. And then the last part is chemically. So, and by chemically, I just mean minerals. It's still organic. But when I go to reamend my soil, if I can put those organic amendments directly into the rhizosphere, that area around the roots, if I can dig down 6 inches and mix those nutrients in there, I'm not having to wait for them to work their way all the way down through the soil profile. So they're going to be more homogeneous which is good for the roots, and then more accessible faster. So a lot of our commercial grows, they're soil testing 2-3 weeks out from harvest. They get the results back and the analysis from us, and then they have their amendments on hand. And so they'll harvest and re-amend on the same day or the next day, and then they have new plants in that room 24 hours later. There's no downtime because they can't afford to have downtime. They need to crush out 5 cycles a year to stay profitable. So we know this process works because we have guys that have been doing it. All that being said, I just want to say there are people that run no-till and truly don't disturb the soil, like Steve Cantwell, who I love, great guy. And they also do quite well. So I'm not going to pretend that like no-till does not work at all. That's my logic for why I think soil disturbance is okay, or maybe even beneficial. But if you want to run no-till, we work with a lot of growers that run no-till, and that's okay too. We figure out ways to make that work.
When you're mixing it in and you're getting 6 inches in, do you maintain a mulch layer at that point, or do you
mulches? Yeah. So that's a good question. So that's one good reason why I don't use mulches, is because I do like to mix my nutrients in. And if I had a layer of whatever, sand, bark, chips, cover crop, it makes it really, really hard to do that. Mulches, I love outdoors. I think they're phenomenal. Cover crops, I love outdoors. In a grow room, I have yet to find the perfect mulch, and I don't really recommend cover crops.
I've been using just like shredded freaking brown paper when I mix it in, just to give them some sort of carbon source. But I don't find it ideal because like the straw doesn't work. People are using rice hulls. I find that ridiculous. Like 3 inches of freaking rice hulls on top of your, it's like, that's a lot, man. And it's just,
rice hulls can be very high in arsenic.
And that's another thing too.
Especially
if you're not getting a really good source, yeah,
people just buying it.
And it takes forever to break back down. I don't know, man.
I just want to throw this out there because we're talking about sourcing. Don't trust people online that are selling you products, myself included. Do your own research, because I've seen independent research on rice hulls, for example, just to talk about this, or someone's bloom booster or fertilizer, that were very different numbers than what they were publishing on their Instagram. So do your own research, I guess, is all. Don't just because someone has a lot of followers doesn't mean that they know what they're talking about, or that they are necessarily putting out a safe product.
That is a great point.
And I love the way you eloquently put that. It's so beautiful.
So eloquently.
Eloquently. Yeah. Excuse my tongue this morning.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that. Again, I can't appreciate you coming on and answering so many questions. It will be I think some of our friends and listeners might overdose from the information for the first time ever. It's like, overwhelming. But to dumb it down, to end it, we have this horrible tradition where we ask some questions. They may seem silly, but everybody gets asked. So, Johnny.
Okay.
What's the first seed you ever planted, and why was it an apple seed?
I don't know what the first seed. Are we talking cannabis specifically, or just in general?
Anything in general.
In general, the first seed in general.
Oh man, I had an edible nursery for a while. I have no idea, man. Maybe a lettuce or probably a bean plant when I was like in 3rd grade. I feel like everyone grows peas and beans.
Yeah, that's probably the most common answer.
Yep, it is.
Apples aren't true to type. I would never plant an apple seed. That's so silly about it.
That is.
It's an ego trip for him. He just wants the apples to be more prevalent.
Yeah, I go by Johnny Apple. It was so we started arguing, and my what do you call it? My handle on the Discord was not Johnny Apple. It was something else, like Johnny Weed Grower or some stupid thing. And we got to arguing back and forth about the green apple Skittle. And I was saying it was better, and he wanted the lime because I'm in New York. Apple is more my type. He's in California, so citrus is for him. So it was just funny, the banter back and forth. So I based these next couple of questions on the love for apples.
Well, did you know that Johnny Appleseed was really planting like cider apples?
Yeah.
They weren't really
edible
for eating. Yeah, that was just for creating safe water, I think.
Yeah, it was
something
like
people could drink.
Yeah, because if I'm probably not correct, but it was a long time. I think his vision was to like create rest spots for people to move cross country, like to expand the West. Or he was a drunk who really liked cider and had patience. All right.
Yeah. I don't know. Apples are fascinating, though. Michael Pollan has a great chapter on it in one of his books. I can't remember which one.
Washington has a huge amount of apples too. I've definitely left out here in Southern California, where I'm just like, I don't think I've seen an apple tree.
Yeah, it's pretty cool what they're able to do here.
What's your favorite pie, and why is it apple pie?
It might be apple pie. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I'll go with apple. Good. My grandma used to make the best. Yeah, apple pie back in the day. Fond memories.
Are you going a la mode?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, vanilla.
No, you got to ask this. Have you heard of this atrocious thing that he's recommending, where you eat apple pie with a slice of cheddar?
No, but I like, and my wife does this a lot. She'll do like apple slices with cheddar, and it's really good. But
you know what?
I can't. Yeah, I don't know if I can get behind that, because I like hot apple pie with like cold ice cream, and I feel like I don't know about adding cheese to that, but
yeah,
I could see it, especially if I was high.
There you go.
That's probably where the idea came from as a stoner.
Yeah.
Apparently it's an older tradition. An old timer taught me this the one time. He's like, "Oh, you've never had that?" And I was like, "All right." And he had it out, and I was like, "No shit, it's actually quite enjoyable." You wouldn't think so, but
I got a weird one like that.
Palate rinser or something.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Try mustard on corn on the cob.
Whoa.
It sounds, and I'm not even a big mustard guy. It's actually pretty good.
I'm gonna have to give that a shot.
There you go. Yeah.
One more. What is your favorite fruit, and why is it apple?
Ooh. I'm gonna have to go avocado on this one, but apple is a very close second. My wife does not like avocados, and so it's been kind of a tragic thing, because I have to like get my own.
You have to fight for it. Yeah. Every time you have it, it's more rare.
But my daughter and I are huge avocado fans, so yeah.
There you go.
I wish we could grow them here. If I could grow avocados, I would do it in a heartbeat.
Nice. These next couple of questions are really designed to really get to know somebody and who they are. So you're going for a slice of pizza on your lunch break. You stop in, and this is your first time at this new pizza joint, and you're just grabbing a slice. Are you going cheese or pepperoni?
Oh, I never really get either. So I try to be a little healthier, even though I'm eating pizza. So I'd probably go cheese. And people are gonna hate this. I love Hawaiian pizza. I just think the pineapple is so sweet. I know it's not. I'm not a purist when it comes to pizza. So
It's okay.
I'm gonna take cheese. I'm taking cheese.
Yeah,
He's that cheese.
yeah,
he's
I would take cheese over pepperoni. I mean, pepperoni tastes better, but like I try to cut back on like processed meats. And
No, I mean, we all agree, but I come from it from a frugal standpoint. I'm gonna be disappointed if I got a really crappy piece of cheese. Where if I got a crappy piece of pepperoni, I'm like, at least I got some meat, I guess.
That's valid. That's valid. You can absolutely brew it. Like a bad cheese pizza is like the worst.
Yeah, you're like, why did I pay for this?
Yeah.
All right, the last one though, Johnny.
And then, what's your go-to sandwich? What's your favorite sandwich? If you could have any sandwich in the world, anybody make it for you, what would be your best sandwich?
Oh man, that's a great question. I don't know. Hamburger's not a sandwich, right?
It is. Hell yeah.
We've heard more ridiculous answers. We interview stoners.
Oh man, I feel like a really good burger is amazing. Though I also like a good grilled cheese with tomato soup. So
what's on your burger then?
So there's a restaurant in Bellevue, Washington called John Howie Steakhouse that makes the most phenomenal. And my buddy and I would go around and we do this thing wherever we travel. We always have like the best burger we can find, and we still come back to this place. And it's just like super high quality beef that they use, and then really like all the ingredients are super high quality, but like really good beef. Really crisp piece of lettuce, cheese, and really good tomatoes on there. And I can't remember if there's a pickle or not because it's been a number of years, but it's just like such a phenomenal burger. There's just nothing like it out there. And so that would be my go-to. Oh, you know what? I got a photo of it here. I'm just going to pop that on the screen for you. We can end with that.
That is the
It is lunchtime here on the West Coast, and I am
East
starving now that you said that. Oh yeah, East.
All right, let's see.
You're on the East Coast.
East.
There's gonna be all kinds of conspiracy theories now that you are.
All right, it's not the best photo, but this is sort of what it kind of looks like. I think this might have been my attempt to make a John Howie burger at home. Actually,
I see it.
That's yummy.
But you can see it's just like brioche bun, lettuce, tomato. This one has bacon on it. This was actually a homemade version. Us trying to make a John Howie burger. I don't know where my John Howie photo is, but you get the idea.
It's close enough. Close enough.
Yeah.
I will say it is more than anyone has ever done with that question before. So fancy points. Again,
I like food, man.
Yeah, it's amazing. Again, I can't thank you enough for giving up your time to do this. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead and plug yourself as much as you can. Please shill.
Okay, well, so my name's Tad Hussey. Company is Keep It Simple Organics. KiS Organics is our website. We're on Instagram, YouTube. I have a podcast called Cannabis Cultivation Science, where I get to interview people way smarter than me and other growers too, and just talk about sort of the science-based information in the cannabis industry. And it can get very technical, but I think it's there's a lot of great information on there. And then the last thing is right now, every Tuesday, I'm doing a Q&A live at 5 p.m. Eastern time on YouTube with either our agronomist, Brandon Hudson, or with Chad Westport, who's a good buddy of mine. And so that's been really fun if anyone wants to check that out. Yeah. And then I guess lastly, we do have a Patreon for the podcast with a private Discord channel. And we do a bunch of stuff, hangouts and book club, where we read a variety of different books. Right now we're reading The Lean Farm by Ben Hartman. If people haven't checked it out, it's a great book. We read the Teaming with Microbes series and The Intelligent Gardener with Steve Solomon. All people have actually been on the podcast, so it's been really fun. And that's me. Yeah, if anyone has questions, feel free to reach out directly.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Johnny,
man,
you want to
thanks for your
follow that
time.
with any plugs?
Nope. Thanks again for
Awesome.
joining us, man.
Yeah, thank you
We
so
really
much.
appreciate your time. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Adios.
Peace.